She's worked for Storyful. She's worked for the UN Agency for Refugees. She co-founded Eyewitness Media Hub, and she sits on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on social media. So we're thrilled to have her.
We have a really great panel tonight. There's not enough white men, I'm sorry. Too many women. We're very happy about that, but it's a rarity. So I have Samantha Barry, who's Head of Social Media and Senior Director of Strategy for CNN. I have Alison Lucas, General Counsel of BuzzFeed. Cora Sicker, who's Director of Partner Platforms at Vox Media, which is kind of a new title. I think there's a lot of people who are interested in what you do every day, Corey, you can tell us. And Carla Zanoni, who's Executive Emerging Media Editor, Audience Development, Wall Street Journal. So all their bios are on the cards. I'm not going to go into detail. They're all hugely talented, do work ridiculously hard, have Slack on continuously. They might be doing things as we speak. But I'm actually going to start and turn to Alison, because we've got to probably talk about the Gizmodo revelations over the last few days. And ultimately today, the Senate is writing a letter to Mark Zuckerberg to say, please, can you tell us, can we have some transparency around the algorithm and the trending topics? So from a legal perspective, what's this definition of platforms and publishers? Should we be thinking differently about the platforms
in terms of what? In terms of,
as publishers, is there an argument now that they are moving into the publishing space?
Well, they would argue no, right? they would argue that they continue to be platforms, that they are merely publishing what's put up, and they'll continue to argue that. We use them as a platform. We continue to look at them as a platform, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, for the panel, do you think there's been a shift on their part, the platforms, that now there's a recognition that they're more of your competitors?
I don't think they're competitors. I think what you have seen on a lot of platforms is, I think maybe a couple of years ago, platforms definitely held themselves up to be just the home, the host, the tenant-landlord proposition. But you have more and more of these platforms that go into curation. You see that with that trending on Facebook, you see that with Twitter Moments, you see that with Snapchat Stories. So while they're not necessarily going into the content making necessarily, they're definitely becoming more and more the curators of editorial content. So that adds another layer to the relationship between platforms and publishers.
And Zuckerberg is probably going to say, we're not going to tell you about the algorithm because that's our secret sauce. But do you think they have a responsibility to be more transparent about the way that these news stories are surfacing?
That was really sneaky. I mean, of course, any organization that you're partnering with, you want transparency. So I won't go into exactly what we would like, but obviously we want clear data and we want an understanding of best practices. I just want to go back to the question you asked at the beginning. I don't think that we are looking as journalists with fear at these platforms. I think aggregators should probably be concerned, because that is the space where, to Samantha's point, curation comes in. And if we're really talking about original journalism that is well-funded and quite costly to produce, those platforms many of them have already tried, and they've backed away from that because they understand that it's a difficult business. So I don't see it. I think that there is a space for us to have a symbiotic relationship for this business model. For other business models, I think it can be a challenge.
Yeah. So everybody talks now about this new reality of distributed content, and you live this new reality, at least three of you, on a daily basis. So I'm just interested to know, we've got kind of a legacy broadcaster, a legacy newspaper, and a digital upstart, if I can use that phrase. So I'm just interested to know kind of like your day-to-day working. Like, what are you thinking when you're waking up in terms of how you distribute your content? Where do you do it? How much of it do you do it? What are you thinking?
So if I'm to be really honest, so I've been at CNN for about 18 months, and I think There was a time at CNN where the only metric of success for social was driving people to CNN.com or driving people to TV, and that is just fighting the last war. So for me, everything that I'm doing with my social teams around the world is all about creating a CNN news habit. And I don't care where that habit happens. I don't care where you're a user. It can be on Snapchat and you're coming back to us 3 times a week. It can be on Facebook Messenger and you're engaging with our content 8 times a week. I care that you have a CNN news habit, and that makes us relevant going forward. So for in the world of disrupted distribution, I think for legacy medias like my own, it's a re-education of what how people consume, and I think it is definitely listening to your audience more and not expecting people to have the news habits of old. So my parents have a news habit where they buy 2 newspapers every day and they watch the 6 o'clock news. That is not the news habit that people have today, and in particular the people that are very mobile and social. And we just need to feed into that news habit because people want to find news and information wherever they are. We just have to be better at distributing it on those platforms.
And how about you, Carla?
Yes, and I do think for us it is still important to get people back to the site. So I think for us, we're looking at distribution platforms as a space where we can build a new relationship with readers and engage with our current readers. And so Snapchat, for example, if you had suggested doing a channel on Snapchat Discover several years ago, I don't think anybody at the Wall Street Journal would have signed on. But there is an understanding that we need to meet the audience where the audience lives. And when that audience is an 18 to 34-year-old audience, we understand that there are new habits, like you're describing, and we need to start building this relationship that's a long-term play. This isn't something that's for a few months. This isn't something that's for a few snaps. This is really educating a new audience about what value the Wall Street Journal can bring. Additionally, we're looking at these new platforms as a way to learn new storytelling methods. And to not be experimenting on those platforms would mean that we would be left behind. So even just in a span of a year and a half of being on messaging apps and these new different platforms, thinking about mobile storytelling, vertical video, et cetera, those are lessons that we learn and that don't occur in a vacuum. We bring that back to the site and we leverage that to make sure that we're speaking the language that this new audience is speaking.
So I'll just push you a little bit on the Snapchat Discover part, because obviously your business model is a subscription model. So that you have a different business model to CNN, but Snapchat Discover is a walled garden, essentially. You can't really link back to the Wall Street Journal. So do you have evidence that people who are coming to you on Snapchat Discover are the same audience that you have paying you subscription, or they are a different younger audience that you hope in the future would pay?
I think it's the latter. First of all, we don't have the data to say whether or not the audience that's in that walled garden of Snapchat, we literally do not have the data to be able to track whether that audience is coming to our site. But we went into this understanding that this is a relationship that's nuanced. It was an audience building strategy, it was a storytelling development strategy, and it's a revenue play as well. So we basically look at a matrix of where are the benefits to participating on a platform there. And if we can tick off several of those boxes, then it's worth making that investment long-term in hopes of converting those readers into long-term subscribers.
Thanks. Corey. Go.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, that was great. I really agree. No, I mean,
The same thing.
what's the question? I'm sorry.
So in terms of on a daily basis, when you're waking up at Vox and you're thinking, what are you putting on what platforms and why, and what's the strategy behind doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we're running happily everywhere. And I, as someone who grew up in sort of the old internet, I did have to at a certain point untrain myself about well, how are we driving traffic to this platform here of our website? And we have a luxurious, gorgeous web platform. Our websites are beautiful. Our advertising is exquisite. Everything we do do on platform is perfection. So like, and this is like something we want to pursue with partners. Like this is, we want to do the most gorgeous work, the most elegantly designed, the most perfectly built work with partners. And that's a challenge sometimes. And I don't know, and I know that these platforms work with partners who all have different priorities. And so I know sometimes we have to step back in those relationships and explain ourselves really well to those partners. I came in hot when I started this job with some of those partners, and now I'm stepping back and saying like, hey, like maybe we never stopped and told you what we actually care about. Like one of the things I care about a lot is like squeezing pennies of revenue out of crazy corners of the internet and platforms. Do you know what I mean? Like I will take a CPM anywhere, like happily. But you know, perhaps no one's gone to these people and said that outright. So I think as publishers, I think we presume that people understand what we want, and maybe we don't help enough actually.
Can I add something? I think I'm mic'd, actually. Look,
You're double. Hey.
I'm double mic'd. I think it's also really important for a legacy publisher or a legacy broadcaster to go into some of these partnerships so that we have a voice at that table. And so what you're saying is so incredibly important. Being able to say there is nuance in all of these different publishers, and we want to make sure that you understand that, because you're building these incredibly rich, wonderful experiences for people, and there are incredibly rich, diverse needs within that. And if we're not at the table, then the product will be developed without us. So we're at a really important time right now where I think that's also part of the reason to get involved in these partnerships.
I mean, and I think related to that, if I piggyback on you, one of the things we see is platforms like reinventing analytics over and over again. So we spend our days digging in another version of someone's dashboard here and there and everywhere, which is a kind of a wacky experience and a thing that didn't necessarily need to happen. I think we can all agree, and is very challenging for a lot of us. So everyone, because of capitalism, everyone had to reinvent a certain kind of wheel that we all kind of wish they didn't have to have done.
Yeah, and just very quickly, I'm going to ask, or maybe I'll ask now about resourcing in terms of your team. Do you need people who are experts in terms of creating different types of content and also experts in creating revenue models on different platforms? Because some of the things you're saying, they're not traditional journalistic skills.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all proposition, and I think if I look at my social teams, in particular social publishing teams, there are people that are amazing at Facebook, and then there's people that are really good at Twitter. Just hired, 6 months ago, hired an amazing person to be our social apps producer, because she knew messaging apps better than anybody I had met. And so when we launched on Facebook Messenger and Kik and Line, she understood how to make different content for each of those platforms. And I think some of the struggles that we have sometimes is we get this great piece of content for TV, and it's expected that it will do really well on social. It doesn't. It needs to be repurposed. It might need to be cut square for a Facebook newsfeed and have closed captions on, because people look at Facebook feeds without the sound on. So I think there's definitely more and more people coming into the journalism world that have specialities in one or a couple of the social platforms and how to publish out on those and be a journalist on those platforms.
So you can no longer just have a social media editor. How many people are in your team?
So it's about 40 and going to 50 by the end of the year.
Wow. Carla?
I'm very jealous. We have about 20 globally. So Hong Kong, maybe I'm being disingenuous. We have 20 people who are on the emerging media team, Hong Kong, London, and New York. And then we have about 60 editors who do other traditional editing and manage our branded accounts. So our Twitter accounts for WSJ Markets or Speakeasy or something like that. Yeah.
Corey?
I have no idea. We run our engagement teams are situated within each of our 8 websites, so they are very different. They have different strategies, different goals that they set, and different teams. So between video teams and engagement teams, it's a pile of people.
And just to go back to my original question, those teams are also thinking about revenue models in terms of the different platforms, or that they're different people?
I mean, my team is made up of editorial people, and they do publishing and news gathering, and they work with the TV side of it. There are teams at CNN whose focus and their primary focus, in particular 2016 and beyond, is looking at revenue, audience development, analytics. So there's actually, while there's a team of 40 people in the social world, there's actually so many different parts of CNN that touch on social now in revenue, but it's not, we separate, the editorial team, don't worry about how the money is coming in.
Good. Yeah. So can I come back to the lawyer? So we're talking here as if, it's kind of a fait accompli. There's no choice but to publish on these platforms.
Right.
But none of these platforms are owned by CNN or Wall Street Journal.
Right.
From a legal perspective, what does it mean to publish on somebody else's platform? What are the risks there? What are the kind of skills or knowledge that people need to have?
Right, so there are a few, right? The first is that you ultimately are giving your content up, and you're a lot of the time people don't really understand, certainly not the publishers or the people, because you presumably have some lawyers you can pass it to, but if you're in the general population, you're just posting your content. You don't really read the terms and conditions. You don't know what you're doing. Presumably you all have given them to a lawyer and have sort of looked them over. But ultimately, if you're going to post on these sites, if you're going to post on these sites, by posting this content, you're agreeing to the terms, right? So for most of these agreements, or for most of these sites, you're going to agree to it no matter what. I would say that by and large, the terms are not that onerous. I mean, by and large, you're giving a license. You're not giving them ownership. I would say that internationally, it's probably a little bit different. We take a closer look. A lot of the times, they have ownership provisions. We need to strike those. You have to look at the indemnities. You have to look at the terms a little more carefully and probably also a portion of that is that we're not around to monitor it carefully, and so you actually want to make sure that the lawyers are getting the first look and really making sure that your editors and your social teams know what they're doing. And so you really want to make sure that they've looked at it and they understand that when they're giving up their content, they know what they're doing. And we've had to actually strike provisions and make sure. You also really want to make sure that you're able to take down your content. And that's something also we make sure that, something like Snapchat is very easy to take down, Facebook is very easy. You want to make sure that really by putting up content, you're just as easily able to take it down. When you have partnerships, when you have much closer relationships, you're able to sometimes you're able to take a closer look at the terms. And so those are the ones that we like to look at the best. If you're dealing with a large company, you're able to make some changes, not a ton, but you're actually able to forge a relationship. And even if it's outside the contractual terms, sometimes they'll talk to you a little bit more. But it's not without risk, and I think that what we've ended up doing is, we talk to our social teams, we talk to our dev teams who are often doing a lot of the work on these. We talk to our editors, and a lot of it ends up being education. We make sure we have all the rights in the photos. We make sure we can take it down quickly if it's a fair use argument that we're making. We just make sure that the editors are really trained in understanding what rights we have, because that's where it's going to come in handy. And that's the best defense, is actually making sure that the editors and the people who are posting really understand what they're doing, because the platforms are their platforms, and they will not say they're publishers. They're not taking on any risk. Going back to the first question, they will never say that they're publishers because of the liabilities associated with that. For whatever if Congress decides to look into it, which they won't, but if they decide to look into it, whatever they say, they will never agree that they're publishers, and so the liability is always going to be on us.
Yeah.
Wow.
It makes me think from a J school perspective, like media law is one of the classic classes you have to take, and I wonder how many media law professors are up to date on some of these things.
I was in J school 25 years ago, and this was never even a thought.
Yeah. No, interesting. Okay, I want to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts in terms of your relationship with the platforms, because you all do a lot every day, and I wonder how many times you talk to the different platforms. Are they on the end of a telephone? Do you have regular meetings with them?
Yeah, with the major platforms that we work with, the Facebooks, Instagrams, Twitters, Snapchat, they're all at the end of a phone. We all have, actually all of the publishers have been, the platforms even, have been very good at having pretty dedicated media teams, and at least either one person or a group of people, and I see some of them here, that work with publishers. And the reality is most of those people are former journalists, or they have worked in a newsroom, so they actually get the inner workings of what it is like to be in a newsroom, what it's like to deal with rights and clearances, what are you actually trying to do in the daily turn. So I'm going through it in my head, and every partnership that I have with a platform is either a former journalist or a former newsroom person. So it makes for a good working relationship.
Mm-hmm. I think that I would echo that. The only space where I'm seeing it change a little bit is actually around the messaging apps space. So that tends to not have former journalists. You have people who are definitely interested in media and maybe have some sort of media background, but not necessarily journalists. And that tends to be much more of a tech and product-driven space, which I think is really interesting for us as we're looking at newsrooms and building an ecosystem that is product and tech and journalism all working together. That's also happening out in the world of platforms. And I think that you're going to see that increasingly.
Yeah, and I think this has come up before, but there's a scale issue here, which is if you're a CNN or a Wall Street Journal, you get a very nice type of service, and if you're a smaller hyperlocal or you're a Metro.
And when I left a smaller hyperlocal and went to the Journal, my eyes were open to the possibilities and what was presented. I actually think, I'll put a plug in for hyperlocals, I think there's a lot that can be done in that space, and I would hope that platforms would go have relationships there and partner up.
Yeah, it's interesting from our research when we look at, legacy or big organisations like your own and hyperlocals who are like, we have to be on these platforms because otherwise we wouldn't get enough traffic. It's the middle ground. It's kind of like the Metro newspapers. They're really struggling. They don't have the resources to have 40 staff or even 2. It's a really interesting space. And you're right. There are people in the audience who are from the platforms, and we're not going to ask them to raise their hands. If they're in, and what sorts of things would you like on a perfect wish list of things that you wish you could get from the platforms, or you would like to see in the next 12 months?
You want just more people to see your content, right? You want to be, it's quite interesting. You have a lot of people in newsrooms that are journalists, and they're trying to game an algorithm, and that's an interesting game to be playing as a publisher. And you're trying to understand these platforms because they move actually much quicker than media organizations. Yeah. So when I talk to my team, I always say, like, if you are doing 6 months ago what you did, are you doing today what you did 6 months ago, you're losing. You're losing the game on Instagram, you're losing the game on Twitter and Facebook and all of these places, because they are moving and changing at a speed that is a little bit foreign to newsrooms, right? They change the game, and we have to be ahead of that, or at least be willing to play by their rules.
Yeah. Any developments you would like to see, or access?
Data. Yeah. I feel like a broken record, but it's just, I think the point that you were making earlier is really important. It's not just more data, although sometimes that can be a good thing, but somehow creating a common narrative around data, so that when I'm looking at one platform, I don't have to do magic on my side with an Excel file and God knows what, to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. Mm-hmm. And that's where we are right now. I think if we're to be successful, we need to come together so that we're all speaking about the same numbers. And it's the same thing as what you see in newsrooms, right? Are we talking about page views? Are we talking about unique viewers? What is it that we're talking about here? And when you then go off onto a platform and there's a different experience and there's a different portal to bring you into that content, how do we measure that? And when we speak about it in public, or when my partners speak about it with advertisers, how do we make sure that we're all on the same page? And we're just not there right now.
Yeah, I think, again, it's sometimes on us. I was talking to the CEO of Pocket the other day, and I love Pocket. It's a read it later service. If you don't use it, it's great. Although maybe I'm stealing page views from myself by saying that. I don't really know. And I said, hey, we would love to see metrics. Like, for us, this is an off-platform view. If someone is reading this, I would like to know. And he was like, well, what do you want to know? Do you want to know, like, what's the #1 most read thing? And I was like, no, I want to know, like, how long someone was there, and like where did they come from, or anything. Like, but I feel like it seemed like no one had said this to him before. Which is maybe possible. Like, maybe we gave up along the way.
Interesting. So I wanted to talk about the rest of the newsroom, and I think, Alison, you could probably come in here a little bit. But in terms of this shift, I mean, if somebody an alien had come from Mars 4 years ago, or even 3 years ago, and heard about all of this, it would seem crazy, and the alien would say, Carla, why are you tying yourself in knots to be on 26 different platforms? This doesn't make sense. And all the metrics are different. But right. In terms of that kind of where we're at, how does the rest of the newsroom view what's happening? And are they a little bit like aliens, or are they totally up to speed?
I'm happy to say that in the past year, that there's been huge advancement in the newsroom. And I think a lot of that had to do with figuring out, just like with any other project, finding your early adopters, having them do cool projects, have the cool kids do the cool projects, so then everybody else wants to follow along. That's been much of our strategy, figuring out who are the people who are going to do this well and get it, and then bring others along. And that's not to say there aren't holdouts. We, on our desk, we joke around, people will come and ask us why their apps aren't working on the phone. There's clearly a disconnect with some folks of what we do and what is happening on your phone. But that is, I probably shouldn't have told that story. Anyway.
Don't tweet that.
Anyway, just between us. But that's happening less and less and less. And people actually know what these different platforms are. And not only do they get the platform, but they understand the nuances between a tweet and a Snapchat vertical video. If I were an alien coming back, right, I would be surprised at that growth in a pretty small amount of time. So I'm optimistic about it.
And as another legacy,
it's interesting. I think, very much to your point, there's a lot of buy-in from the newsroom, even in the last year alone. And a lot of it is on the people in the roles like ours, feeding back metrics of success. So an example for me was late last year we had the Democratic debate in Vegas, and it was a rating bonanza. It was 15.5 million people watched it on TV, and that was the 6th largest non-sporting event in US television history. Boom, great, amazing. We broke some records in terms of video views on CNN.com. And the next day, after the dust had settled and the press releases had gone out, I sent to some key people at CNN some metrics from social. And it was, titled How We Turned a 2-Hour TV Event into a 2-Day Global Trend. And on one of our Facebook pages alone, we had 26 million video views that night on debate content. The amount of impressions and reaches that we had across all of the platforms were amazing. And one of the biggest wins of the Democratic debate and the Republican one straight afterwards is that we got a Vanity Fair photographer, Nigel Perry, in to do cinemagraphs of every single candidate. We did that for Instagram. That was the reason why we were doing it. It was the reason why we got him in. And I don't know I'm sure many of you will have seen it. These are the images against black of the candidates where the light goes across their face. They're everywhere now. They're in an exhibition in the museum, but they were done for social in the first place. So I think a lot of the work of social teams is to feed back the metrics and to kind of keep saying, here's the result when you actually engage with social. And the win for me was a couple of weeks before we had the Obama town hall. Anderson Cooper's EP, not Mr. Social himself, not a big fan of social media, and he'll freely admit that.
You can tweet that.
No, it's fine. Yeah, you won't say it. called me, and this hadn't been announced, and he said 4 people at CNN know that this is happening. Me, Jeff Zucker, Anderson, another senior producer, and he was like, I'm telling you now because I need you to start planning the social plan. And that for me was the moment, oh, this is good. Like, people are on board that I didn't think were on board before. But it really is, there's always going to be people that you can get on your bus, and there's always going to be people that will look at it with mistrust in newsrooms, and you just have to deal with that.
Yeah. So very quickly, do you guys send out like daily metrics emails? Just for people in the room who might.
Yes, I mean, we have automated dashboards. We brought newsroom analytics. There's somebody on my team and an audience development manager that look at metrics on a daily basis and do bespoke reports. We've tried to automate as much as humanly possible because it's a lot to do, and we're currently looking at different tools that will make data in the newsroom much more user-friendly. But I will say we currently, and we're in the process of refining it, we had to create a brand new dashboard around off-platform. And in that process, this is what I was talking about around apples to apples. It's not enough to just put a bunch of data on a spreadsheet or a dashboard. You really need to make sure that that the people who are looking at it understand the differences between these platforms, because you can imagine in a large organization where a lot of people are having siloed conversations, misinformation can be really damaging. And to not understand the difference between, let's say, Facebook metrics and Snapchat metrics can be really problematic and will take quite a long time to scale back.
Yeah. And so how about the upstarts? How is it to be in a place where you were built on distributed content?
It's funny. I mean, like we hired a new engagement editor for Racked.com recently, and like on day 2, she was like, "When am I getting onto instant articles?" And I was like, "Okay, wow, hi." Like, so people like they want like these things, and I was like, "We're running some numbers and making sure they're a good thing, you know." Still doing some math, but so there. I mean, people are hungry to be a part of things, and not like willy-nilly, like, oh, like let's, you know, follow some crazy plan into nowhere. But they're very brave and adventurous. I'm impressed with the newsroom.
And from a kind of a legal compliance point of view, do you have to kind of dampen down enthusiasm?
No, we don't do that because then lawyers they won't come to us, right? So,
yes.
So you know, my pitch is always come to us. We won't say no. We might say yes, but we try very much to think things through. And you know, so a good example is Live, right? So Facebook Live. You know, I was somewhere where I couldn't, I didn't have access to my phone, and so I was gone for about an hour, and then I reached back for my phone, and someone said, did they have safety goggles on when they blew up a watermelon? And I said, wait, I don't know what you're talking about. Luckily, they found a lawyer, and there were safety goggles on. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but we blew up a watermelon.
Everyone does.
Right, 850,000 concurrent viewers. So it's the kind of thing where we have to, right? Otherwise, they won't come to us. And so, you know, we very quickly, so live comes up, it's a thing, it's announced, and everybody's going to do live because you have to if you're gonna do it. So we drew up live guidelines, but the fact of the matter is it's any guidelines. It's the same guidelines we would do for any production. We say you have to pay attention to copyright, you have to pay attention to defamation, you have to pay attention to clearance, and we just say make sure you come to us because it's like live television, right? It's like anything else. Just pay attention and just come to us and clear the concepts with us beforehand. So it makes us think, but it doesn't make us say no more. We just have to make sure that we're paying attention and that we still have to maintain a good relationship with people. But you know, it's interesting. This is a non-legal point. But you know, you do see an energy in the newsroom when there are new platforms that are announced, right? Because especially in the newer non-legacy, you know, there is a younger population and people are excited and they're trying new things and anytime there's a new format, they're excited to try it. Not that you wouldn't try it otherwise, but you see this happening, right? So this is actually, if there's an alien coming down, I don't think that is actually they wouldn't be confused. They'd say, this is actually great. So anyway.
I'm proud that it took us half an hour to mention the watermelon. I thought we'd get to it much earlier. But it does kind of lead on to sort of my final question, which is the elephant in the room, which is this sustainable? I mean, obviously post-watermelon, there was a lot of, we're doing whatever it takes to drive clicks on these platforms. It's not sustainable. This is crazy pants.
I think if you take the two examples Alison just used, Facebook Live and the new platforms, I actually really agree that it's invigorated the newsrooms. We launched on 3 messaging apps in the last month, and we're exploring what storytelling looks on Facebook Messenger and Kik and Line, and how do you do storytelling to an Asian audience for Line, and what are you doing in talking to an average age group of 13 to 17 year olds on Kik? What do you do on Facebook Messenger? And even with Facebook Live, it's a little, I think the newsroom has been a little bit energized by the fact that it doesn't have to be produced TV. It can be quick and dirty and interactive and real, and in the last couple of days, we went live on a Navy sub with Jim Sheetal, and we went live from outside of Leicester Football Club when they won as underdogs. And we've actually used that and Facebook Messenger and all the messaging apps to really kind of highlight the types of reporting we're doing around the world. And it's been really fun.
Mm-hmm. I think the sustainable question is a bit different for large organisations like yourself, but you're saying for the quality of journalism, it's there. Yeah. It's not impacted. And what about you, Carl?
And I think so I think it's definitely important to remember that the story is the most important thing, right? And so when we say yes to one platform, sometimes that means that we're saying no to other platforms. And believe me, I want to say yes to everything. I would love to do every single thing. It's fun, it's interesting, it keeps this job from being boring. But so it's hard to say no. But I think at the end of the day, if we can remember that the journalism is the most important thing and find the best home for that journalism, then that will remain sustainable. For me, it's not about just driving empty calorie clicks back to the site. It's about engagement. It's about building a very long-term relationship with subscribers, frankly. You had asked a moment ago if people on this team are thinking about revenue. I hope that my social media editors and audience engagement editors and everyone, that they're not necessarily thinking about that, but we all should be thinking about that. I think that that's kind of what got us into trouble in the first place in journalism. So being wise about what platforms we choose to go on rather than just frantically trying to do everything is how we keep it sustainable.
Yeah.
And leveraging those lessons that we're learning on the platforms and bringing them back to our site, right? This is a symbiotic relationship. And that's what these platforms can give us: entry into a new way of storytelling, entry into a new audience, a way to learn nuances about our audience and the people who have an affinity with our storytelling, and then building that relationship for a long time. When I think about it that way, I get really excited, and I feel like that's the secret here. But when we stray, and we're doing things like, if the Wall Street Journal started smashing watermelons, right?
Exploding them.
Exploding them, right? Right, I'm thinking Gallagher because I'm so old. But, I think it would be a mistake. And that would be a really quick decline, because it would show that we were just grasping at straws and not understanding our audience.
So, Corey, do you ever have editorial meetings where there's kind of like, oh, well, we don't really want to do that. Oh, it would work really well on Snapchat.
Oh, I don't go to editorial meetings. It's great. I mean, one of the great things about sitting outside of editorial is I actually I'm trying to say this in a good way. Like, I'm extremely content agnostic. Like, that is for other people to think about. I am there to help them make things in the best way possible. I am there to help them not have a race to the bottom. I am there I'm there to ensure like the longevity of journalism. And I have an incredibly elaborate plan to do it that I can't tell you about. But no, I'm kidding. But like, this is like a real thing. Like, we're working with containers, and we use platform as a term all the time, which is sort of like a messy, not quite exact term. Like, we're putting things in little boats, right, and like shoving them in little rivers. It's not better, like, we're doing something that we need a better metaphor for, and we're doing this hopefully in a thoughtful way, and we want to do this in ways that excite the journalists who work with these outside enterprises, and when they don't feel good about it, in my first week, someone came to me and said, like, oh, we're trying this new thing, and like, I'm not really getting the engagement. It doesn't feel right for the audience, and I was like, I need you to stop doing that, like, now. Like, it's not good for you. It's wasting your time. Just cut and run. Like, you're done with that platform. And we should be saying that to journalists all the time. If it feels bad, don't do it.
So many tweetable lines. Did you want to say something, Alison? No.
That's a good way to end.
So we've got about 2 minutes before the questions. So we'll start thinking about your questions. I can only quiver about what they're going to be. But can I have a tweetable prediction from each of you? Yikes.
Wow.
If we were sitting here, like, you can even just say, like, a platform that you think would surprise us that we haven't something that you think in a year's time.
So we've been playing around with voicemail.
Oh, hello.
Rock hard.
Nice.
We did something special for Valentine's Day, and we're looking at what we're going to do for the rest of the year, where we didn't brand it as CNN. Again, it was that rock star social apps producer, Mizuma, that's on my team. She came up with an idea of for Valentine's Day, that people would just call into a number and tell us their stories. And it was so beautiful. We didn't brand it as CNN. Obviously, when you rang the number, we had a lot of legal disclaimers and letting people know we were CNN. And people from all over the world called in and left these messages of how they had met their husband or wife or lover, and the one that got away. And we ended up spinning up a Twitter account called Hello Love Story, and we used SoundCloud, and we pushed out the voicemails. And then as it got closer to Valentine's Day, we animated some of the best ones, and it ended up on CNN.com. It got sold, which was an extra bonus.
Got sold to who?
It was sold to a watch brand. They wanted to get involved. But that wasn't where the idea had come from. And then it ended up on Brian Stelter's Reliable Sources, and it was this beautiful use of this very old technology, and people were dying to ring in and leave their voicemail. So voicemail is my prediction.
Pigeons.
Well, I love it. I just think it's funny because I'm going to say just voice. And I'm married to a sound engineer, and something that he taught me is that when we watch movies, when we watch something, you get the information from the visual, but you get the emotion from voice. And I'm particularly interested in something like, say, a Siri or an Alexa, and what we can really do to build empathy and tell stories through that kind of medium. And so I have some ideas that I'm playing with, and I really think there's, for us here, we all probably walked here or took the subway or what have you. You were probably all on your phones, but the rest of the country is, in their car. And I think that voice is something that we'll see very rapidly becoming part of our lives. Maybe not in New York City as much, but in the privacy of your homes.
Corey, no pressure.
Let's go for consensus. Like, half the stuff I'm shipping in the next 2 weeks is audio. Yeah. Like, this is I love it. It's exciting. It excites the engineers. It excites users. People love it. This is like a real thing. I mean, from Anchor, I don't know if people are using that. People are starting to use it out in San Francisco, which is a small app where people like leave audio droppings for people to Alexa, and all the, the audio is great. It's a wonderful medium. It's the 1940s.
So we'll meet back here this time next year. See what it is.
Hey guys, my name is Jerry DeWick. I'm from a company called Monotype. The question is to the entire group. There's one kind of technology that's been mentioned all over the place in the past few weeks, chatbots. I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that as a publishing platform, as a medium. You mentioned messaging apps as a technology, so comments on chatbots.
Samantha, do you want to start seeing
Yeah,
CNN?
So we've launched on 3 messaging apps, and all of those messaging apps bring together kind of 3 parts of CNN: product, design, and editorial. And so while chatbots power a lot of the interaction, if you as a user are going in and asking CNN something, what we push out is very much editorial and programmed. So I think there's maybe a misperception that everything you do at CNN or whatever media company on messaging apps is all done by a robot. It's not. There's an editorial team behind choosing what we curate, choosing what we push out. So that's really important to us. But it's been interesting playing around in that space, because even when we launched on those, we kind of had to rethink our language as journalists. So we went into the room thinking, oh, we've got a news story for you. It was very CNN broadcast voice. And then we, as a team, decided actually that's not how people talk on messaging apps, and we changed it to personal pronouns. So it's I, you, me. Everything is about. If you play around in an intimate space like messaging apps, you have to really be authentic in your voice. So the bot part of it has been interesting. We've been working with the product team at CNN and some outside vendors, but it's very early days in the bot world of journalism.
Can I just, sorry, just because we've got quite a few people in the line, would you, because that was such a good answer. Would you mind, you can talk to other people over wine, but I'm worried about time and wine.
Hi, my name is Ragna Misra, and I'm a freelance journalist. My question was mostly for Corey. It was how you use demographics for different platforms, especially because you have like Racked versus Verge and Vox. And I was wondering how you manage it with like gender, and we can talk about race also, but like age, I was mostly interested in.
Yeah. I mean, so engagement editors are a horizontal layer across our company who are like the social scientists who understand journalism probably better than anyone in the world, right, at this point in time. And they look distinctly at who they're reaching, where, and then what they want to do with them there. So I'm always surprised to hear like they care a lot about Instagram. I mean, I love Instagram, obviously, but they're like, but Instagram is where we communicate with like people who are 24, who are cool, who live in cities and like want to talk to us. So like they see this like platform as like a great place to engage with people, whereas I'm like, yeah, Instagram's awesome, but like, don't you want them to leave a blog comment or something? But no, they don't. So they use that in terms of platforms.
Hi, I'm a data analyst in a advertising company, so I know how much revenue you can make through advertisements. So I was just wondering if does your revenue metrics ever factor into your editorial decisions? Do you ever find yourself pushing celebrity news rather than some other content that doesn't get click-through rates, and how does that ever happens? If it happens, does it create any ethical issues in the organization, or? Yep, that's it.
Great question. Who wants to be honest?
I'll be. No, it does not happen, and I feel really good about that. And I can tell you, when we launched on Snapchat, for example, I was very firm in that I wanted us to be the Wall Street Journal there and share core coverage, business, markets, finance. That is what we cover. We're not going to do a Beyonce story for the sake of a Beyonce story. Now, with that said, with that very firm answer, I understand how lucky I am to be at an organization that has a standards and ethics department. A team that's sitting there making sure that we don't cross that line. But it's really hard. And I would imagine at a lot of startups, not our current friends up here, but at a lot of startups where you have a much smaller team, I would imagine that's a really tough conversation to have. I'm happy to say I haven't had to have that.
Does anybody else want to say anything, or was it the same answer?
The same. I think it's, it dilutes your brand, right?
Yeah.
You can go after certain types of content, and CNN, we covered the light as well as the dark, but I agree, but it doesn't play a part of the editorial.
So I want to know how much money, but we'll ask that. Hello.
Hi, my name is Keith Reynolds, and I've been an editor of a brand-owned publication. And I'm wondering what you think about what happens when brands start to own their own publication, what that does to your editorial policies and what that does to your revenue models when they've now begun to disintermediate and not come to you because you have an audience, but rather they have content that has an editorial perspective. Just as two media companies can have very different perspectives, they're bringing a third brand-owned media properties are bringing a third perspective, and I wonder what that does to your thinking.
No, it's an interesting point. I used to work for the UN last year, the refugee agency. Same thing. We used to have to go through the news organisations, and suddenly we could just push out our own content on Facebook, and So yeah, any thoughts on that issue?
Sorry.
Are you worried that a brand is, could take your newsfeed spot?
What if they scoop you? What if they scoop you?
Right?
I guess it's in terms of algorithms. Facebook has an algorithm, scarcity. UN is going to get a place for Fox. That's a better way to translate it.
Or what if they want to carry one of your stories on their platform?
Oh my God, fight.
It's interesting. I mean, this is sort of outside my world. It's an interesting question. I don't have a ton of good answers for you.
I don't know. I guess I don't believe. I'm going to give you a really crunchy answer to this, but I don't believe in scarcity like that. I mean, we're living in a world where you have just as much power to publish as that brand, and I think it just keeps coming. I feel like I'm on my journalism soapbox, but it keeps coming back to who has the best story, who's delivering what the audience wants. And frankly, if a brand is kicking my ass, then I should probably look at what they're doing and start doing some of that myself. So,
and I'm
welcome.
wondering what happens on the revenue model side as well. I mean, it opens opportunities for partnerships.
Right. I don't believe in scarcity.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
There's all this opportunity.
And there's a time, I mean, now we live in the age when Dollar Shave Club has its own publications, Casper has a sleep blog, do you know what I mean? There's all this stuff exists. It's cool. I mean, it's fun. This is a long way from Departures, the magazine. It's a pretty rich world. It's fascinating.
No, I came down here because I really do believe brand journalism and inbound journalism, the things that are going on with brands starting their own media properties, it's really going to change the mix. I just wondered, the traditional media viewpoint, you've been doing new media within the traditional media, and now you have this new environment.
There's room for you on the Facebook trending algorithm too.
So sassy. No, we actually haven't talked about sponsored content, but let's next question.
Yay.
Oh, it wasn't the next question. Hi, I just wanted to play devil's advocate for a little bit. At the beginning, you dismissed the idea that platforms would want to be considered publishers, I thought, pretty rapidly, and it sounded, in my opinion, perhaps a little naive. There's, Netflix used to be a platform, is now very much a publisher, as is Amazon. This has disrupted other industries. I don't kind of rationally see why it could not disrupt news organizations, like print news organizations. These companies are flush with money. They have the audience. They don't necessarily have the expertise, but you can buy the expertise when you have money, as we've seen over and over again, right? Apple's in the car business, possibly. They're in the fashion business. I don't understand why they couldn't be in the media business. And is that something that you're worried about, have actually thought about and are worried about? Is it something that you just really... I'm kind of interested in the legal side of that too. I hadn't thought about that. Why does that not apply to Netflix, but it does apply to newspapers or media companies? So that was my question.
It's actually a good point. It's actually an excellent point, because when we do have, when I look at BuzzFeed, we do have a platform side in terms of our user-generated content. So we have the news platform and the UGC platform. I was looking at it when I look at Facebook. I really look at it from a liability perspective, and in that perspective, I can't see how being a publisher helps, because anything that's pushed on their content, put up there, from a liability perspective, I wouldn't want it. But it's a good point, right? Like, you're right. Netflix now certainly is a publisher, and Amazon. So you also had sort of, I think, said the same thing. But it's,
they're both, I mean, I don't think we would ever say the platforms aren't in the media business, because they are. And they are very good points. I think what my feeling is that there are so many news organizations around the world, small, medium, and large, that are doing great journalism, that I don't necessarily see Facebook sending out foreign correspondents to Syria to make content, but I definitely think they want to be the home of that content, and that's a disruption in itself.
I just very quickly jump in and say publishing risk. It's really difficult. Like, I don't know if you saw today that there was a woman who committed suicide in France live on Periscope, and now authorities in France are talking to Periscope about that. I mean, the risk around publishing, and news organizations have known this for a long time, and it's a really great question, and I think aliens might come down in 5 years' time. Like, do you remember that crazy panel where they didn't even consider it? So it's a really important question. But I do think that platforms like, publishing risk is scary.
Right. But there is, and you have things like Yahoo. You more than think about it, but you then do have to start to think about how you really distinguish them, and you're going to have to. There are a lot of risks with doing it, and you're going to have to separate it out to make sure that it's very clear.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that like the car industry also has a lot of risks and liability, and so and we have seen tech organizations go into that, Google, and so these people are. I'm interested in sort of your answer. I just think that we've been as an industry naive before about this stuff.
I think a lot of it I don't think they don't need the tiny pool of money that media creates.
That's a fair answer. Yeah.
They're sort of like,
Hi, my name is Krista Pohlmeyer, and I am a freelance editor. So we've talked a little bit about the importance of demographics, making sure you get all these different demographics and reach as many people as possible. But I think it's interesting, especially since you've just mentioned that voice and voicemail might be the new emerging form of communication. How do you balance that with reaching harder to reach demographics, for example, like the deaf? How are you going to adapt that technology and that media to reach smaller groups of people that are harder to reach?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that we actually, and it goes back to the digging into data and understanding who the audiences are, and the tech companies and the platforms are way better at that than we are, let's be honest about it. And it's digging in and really understanding, if we're distributing on social, who exactly is actually engaging with that content. An example from this week is that we, on CNN Money's Facebook page, we went live from a Nigerian market, and it went through the roof, like for us. No watermelon, but for us it did really well. And I didn't know where those numbers were going to come from, and before I went in, I said, oh, we have a very active Nigerian audience on Facebook. That must be who shared it. That must be who looked at it. And we dove into it, and more than half the people came from Saudi Arabia. And I didn't understand, and I don't even have the context of why that is, but even just posing that question and understanding, why were our audience in Saudi Arabia really interested in what was happening with the Nigerian economy from a Nigerian market? Is it the time of day that we published? Why was that? I don't know the answers to that question, but we can keep posing with social metrics, like who are we reaching? Even, you talk about that reaching hard to reach parts of the population. When we start more and more using closed captioning on what we put out to social, we've seen an uptake. Now, I think the majority of that is because people are on the subway and they don't want to turn on their phone or their volume level. But I think it's adding to a service to people that wouldn't have been able to engage with that content before.
I would add, we're not only looking at different abilities like that, which is really important. As I've been thinking about voice, I've been actually investigating what does the sight-impaired community, what's that experience like for them? They've been using voice for a long time, right? But additionally, I think it's also really important to be thinking about reach in different socioeconomic spaces globally. So we're all talking about Facebook Live, but I know that the reality is if you are in a small town in Indonesia, the chances of you being able to see the Wall Street Journal content in that format is pretty slim. So thinking about a variety of ways to reach the audience is just as important, different medium. So it could be using captioning. It could be using cards that are easy to read so that you don't have to wait for video to render. Thinking about a diversity of offerings is equally important.
And to that point, thinking of the people that are seeing our content for the first time on 2G, or that's. I think a lot of Western newsrooms don't think about that enough. And you have 1 billion people that are going to get a smartphone over the next 5 years, and they're not going to be on the strongest connectivity, at least for the first couple of years. So that's, I think, sometimes not thought about enough in newsrooms.
And it's partly why WhatsApp is growing in such huge numbers.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. You had great answers, so thank you.
Thank you for a great question. I think that's time to wrap up. Great set of questions.
So let's hear it for our fantastic panel and moderators.